Story 1. Being a mover, sweating and lugging sectionals up flights of stairs was tough. The winters were brutal, and the summers were hot and humid. We basically had to force ourselves to drink water to stay hydrated. The only upside was receiving tips from generous customers. Story 2. Call center. Specifically, a customer service call center for a United States wireless provider that starts with S and rhymes with print. No one calls their wireless service provider because they're so happy and everything is going smoothly, so basically the job in its very nature is set up in a way that you never really get to have a good day at work. It's the only job I've ever quit without having another job lined up afterward. Story 3. Call center. Chained to a phone from the second you start in the morning to the end of your day. Having to talk to people all day, many of whom aren't happy, is mentally draining. I would have to be one step from homelessness before I even consider going back to that job. Story 4. It ruined my outlook on life and also showed me how cruel the majority of people are when they think they are better than you. There were so many days I would sit in my car having to psych myself up to go in just to work. Then sitting in the car for 5 to 10 minutes trying not to cry after my shift was over. Story 5. Fast food. Nothing compares to getting yelled at for prices, recipes, or other things that are not your fault while making minimum wage and working 12 or more hour shifts. Story 6. Teaching destroyed me physically, mentally, and emotionally. I spent way too much money on my classroom getting things my students needed that the district wouldn't purchase. I loved the act of teaching and my students. I taught special education. I had a lack of support from administration, but I had some really horrible administrators who tried to put their responsibilities on me and also blame me for things they didn't do, which were clearly their responsibility. I had some great parents and truly awful parents. Because I taught special education, I worked with paraprofessionals. Some were great, but many not only had no training but had never even been around kids, let alone kids with severe disabilities, refused to follow individualized education programs, left kids with seizure disorders completely alone in rooms, and even lost students in the school building. The administration did nothing. I left. Story 7. Factory. Doing the same movements and actions all day long for 40 hours a week made me brain rot. It was only a summer job, thank God. Never felt more motivated to go to university. Story 8. When I was just out of high school, I worked in a plant that slaughtered and prepared chickens for retail sales. My job was to clean up all the blood and guts all over the place from the processing. Never want to do that again. Story 9. Corporate office work involves handling routine paperwork and pretending as if the fate of the entire world depends on the trivial matters discussed in weekly meetings. Just shoot me. Story 10. Any waiter or bartender works in busy locations. It's a nightmare when the bar fills up in 2 minutes and you have to remember all orders, clean, and do a million other things at once. Story 11. I had a summer job working in a factory making fiberglass insulation. We had to wear long sleeves and pants to keep the fiberglass off our skin, but it got on us anyway. A giant metal warehouse full of insulation in the humid Virginia summer, while itching like crazy, was the worst working experience of my life. Story 12. Roofing, specifically flat roofing. There was nothing redeeming about the job. I'd say 2/3 of my coworkers were ex-convicts, and they brought that mentality to the roof. Since I'm white, I ended up on the wrong side of a race-related conflict between the whites and the Cubans. Much like prison, there's no real neutral. You're with your own or you're on your own. Hours were terrible, with my days often starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 7 p.m. Good money, and since you didn't have time to spend it, you saved up fast, but when you factor in travel time and how brutal the job was, it utterly crushed you. Rampant alcohol and drug abuse while on the roof. Flat roofing doesn't stop ever. Rain or snow, sun or no sun, hot or cold, you worked. Backbreaking labor, you get into decent shape, but again, not worth it. Accidents and accidents. Accidents happen on the roof and they happen at height. Nobody actually wore their safety harness unless we had a tip that the ministry was coming. You'd get burned, take some falls, get electrocuted, and of course, horrible accidents occasionally occurred as well. Redoing previous work if a bad storm ruined it. Pitch roofing. To repair a roof, you need to tear up the old roof. Pitch is some weird caustic material and it burns. Bosses would usually pay triple salary to get guys to work on pitch roofs. It burns as soon as it touches your skin and can seriously harm you if you inhale it. Asbestos. Basically, any sort of old material that needed removal before the new roof could be placed. I've been in the army nearly 17 years, and I take literally anything I've done in the military over the nightmare that was being a roofer. Story 13. It wasn't even the constant lifting of 200-pound people, wiping of privates, watching people take their last breaths, hearing elderly people cry and moan and complain and whimper and ache and grumble and groan, running back and forth, taking short breaks, having to change clothes as soon as I walk through my doors. It was the fact that I was one person taking care of 13 people every hour. I had to handle them all on my own because no one would help. If you were lucky enough to have a friend on your shift, you could buddy up, team lift, shower in pairs, and get your people done so fast. But if you have no friend on the floor, you are stuck. Your coworkers are not your friends. Management is not your ally. Residents are just income to anyone not wearing scrubs. The nurses are mentally exhausted because they hear complaints and are constantly being asked for medication all day as if they're doctors, but the doctors only come by once a week at best, and only the good nurses help you do physical labor. Otherwise, they just sit at the nurse station and watch us try to care for 13 people in a single hour. If you have even 2 total care people who mess themselves while you're trying to hand out lunch trays, management will throw an absolute fit if you don't handle them. They will also throw a fit because you've handed out lunch trays so late that they've become cold. They stand in the halls and watch as you try to keep up and shout that you shouldn't have the linen cart in the hall at the same time as the lunch cart because it's unsanitary. But yet you can't leave that person to sit in their filth either. You can't win. And they don't help. And when you threaten to quit, or you snap and need to cry alone in the break room, or you go off on one of them, or you shout back at the one resident who demands a 3rd sponge bath despite being fully capable of standing and bathing herself but just doesn't want it because she pays to be there, and therefore we're her servants, then we get a pizza party. I'll specify by saying that I was in a nursing home and not a hospital or other facility. It was a health and rehabilitation place where people came to either get better and go home or live out their remaining days. Story 14. People have no idea how awful working in the United States Postal Service is, especially for new recruits. 6 days a week mandated work. They tell you where you need to be to sort and deliver mail in unfamiliar areas with unfamiliar processes. The work is just awful. Awful. Story 15. Obviously, I never want to work at McDonald's again, but if push came to shove and it was that or be homeless, you best believe I'm selling them McMuffins to you. The one job I don't think I'll ever physically be able to do again, and quit because of how badly it harmed my body, is logging. I'll never do it again because I probably can't, and if I tried, it would only be a matter of time until I was dead or completely disabled. I sure did love being in the woods every day, though, just a little too much hospital time on the other end of the scale. Story 16. I worked for a guy who had a small business cleaning air filters for heavy mining equipment and local quarries. For pretty much any diesel equipment they had, I would refurbish the air filter for $60 to $100 instead of replacing it for $500. I would thoroughly clean these filters by spinning them on a roller table and blowing the debris out with air, then checking each one for holes. Once clean, I would bag and box each filter and inventory them. It was a very small 2-bay shop, with inventory on one side and the roller table and darkroom on the other. The job was very strenuous and extremely dirty. I'd leave there caked in dirt, hacking up mud, extremely tired and sore, all for about $150 a week as a second part-time job. Eventually, I quit because he went on vacation for 2 weeks and left me with 2 weeks worth of work to do. I completed my work and left my time card in the same place I always did. He said he never found my time card and refused to pay me. I was his only employee, and I clearly did the work, as the inventory bays were full of freshly cleaned filters, over 1,000 of them. Forget that job and forget that guy. Story 17. Corrections officer. I did that for 2 years, and it was 2 years too long. Most days were easy and simple, but you were always on edge because, as everyone there said, it's a day like any other until it's not. When things went wrong, they really went wrong. The environment on the inside was really bad for my mental health. It took 3 years of therapy for me to work out 2 years of damage, and I'm sure there are still things hidden under the surface that I haven't discovered yet. The other officers were much worse than the inmates, Being female in an all-male prison didn't cause issues in the way you'd expect. In those 2 years, I only had one instance of a sexual advance by an inmate, but countless sexual advances from my coworkers. You need really thick skin and an ability to shut people down with backhanded humor. For example, one guard said he wouldn't mind me performing oral sex on him, so I told him, "Sorry, I only do that for big men because small things are choking hazards." It earned me brownie points with those who overheard, and that officer didn't bother me again. One good thing about that place was that everyone had your back in an emergency. It didn't matter what your political or religious beliefs were, how mean or nice you were, or anything like that. If you needed help, everyone who could come rushing to help would be there in an instant. You never had to face a problem alone. Still wouldn't go back, no matter how much you paid me. Story 18. Tending bar in a casino. I loved my bartending colleagues, but I was sexually harassed and threatened with rape regularly, and my bosses told me it was just part of the job and to let men touch me for tips, which were pooled and split according to seniority, so I barely saw a penny of them anyway. Plus, the unsociable hours, bleck. I don't even like casinos in general. I went a whole summer not ever seeing the dark. Started work at 8 p.m., finished at 6 a.m., walked home in the daylight, slept all day, walked to work in the daylight, and the casino had 0 windows. They also have no clocks usually, so gamblers don't know what time it is. One regular, who always tipped generously and was a nice guy to talk to, was found in the river next to the casino. He'd been in massive debt and nobody knew. Then he took his own life. None of the casino staff seemed to show any emotion. They just lamented the loss of one of their biggest wallets. It was disgusting. Story 19. You were never trained well enough. There are not enough hours to staff the pharmacy. There are too many medications to fill, too many vaccines to give, and you are the person who gets yelled at over everyone's frustrations with private health insurance. January is the worst time of the year because deductibles reset and prescriptions are usually more than the month prior. It always leads to some elderly person screaming at you, except it happens all day long. Story 20. Casino card dealer. Gamblers are the most entitled, selfish, and rude people on the planet. We have people out there starving and homeless, and these individuals throw thousands of dollars in a bet on a foolish game that's literally rigged against them. They have the audacity to throw childish tantrums when they lose and then blame the dealers or punch the machines. Absolutely ridiculous. Story 21. Picking green beans. In the 1960s, it was a great way for parents to get their kids out of the house in the summer. You go out at dawn when the vines are covered with dew, so you immediately get drenched. You fill your burlap bag with beans, drag it to the truck when it's full, and give it to the person who weighs it and marks the weight on your card. At the end of the day, you got 3 cents per pound. Runner-up, picking strawberries. Killed your back, but paid better. Story 22. Production worker on the main line building cars. I lost 4 stone in 3 months after starting there. Just relentless, non-stop working from car to car. Story 23. Respite care, provider, and in-home care for children with special needs. The children were great. It was hard emotionally and physically though, and dealing with parents is the absolute worst. Also, the pay is terrible. Story 24. Any form of sales where the product is worthless. I used to work for an outsourced facility maintenance company that serviced large retail and restaurant brands. The idea was that the client could just call one number, ours, instead of having to manage hundreds of skilled trade service providers across the country. The problem was that my company made poor deals with the clients that locked in the rates they paid for plumbing, electrical and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, which were significantly less than the market rates. My job was to find contractors willing to work for that rate in exchange for volume that might not ever materialize. In some parts of the country, our rate was less than the trip charge for many contractors. Then they had to navigate various technical requirements just to get paid, and there were fees deducted for every minor mistake they made in the process of submitting their invoice to us. On top of that, my company intentionally failed to meet the net 45 terms they promised. Forget that. Story 25. Lifeguard. 1 piece of glass breaks in a pool. Oh, 2 days of scorching sun and elbow grease worth below the average pay? This happens so often I often wished I didn't take that summer job. Children swimming with glasses. Oh, one of the lenses fell, and it's impossible to find it without draining the entire pool? Insanity, haha. I hate people who bring glass to the pool. Please, if that breaks, it's not your problem, it's ours.